Oh, great. Well, welcome everyone. Thank you, Diana. Welcome. My name is Mary Scholl. I work at the Institute for Collaborative Learning, and I am so happy to be here with you all today to welcome you to Eyes, Ears, Mouth, and Nose, Seeing and Assessing Learning in the Preschool Classroom with Matt Schaefer. I am really grateful to the U.S. Embassy for sponsoring these sessions that we're doing. We're also really grateful to the Ministry of Public Education and the Preschool Department for the collaboration in creating these webinars, and really grateful to Yvonne for his support today, and to Matt for his leading us off today, teaching us and helping us learn about assessing learning in the preschool classroom. We're going to start out with a welcome.
Hola a todos. My name is Elizabeth Smith, and I'm the Cultural Affairs Officer here at the U.S. Embassy in Costa Rica. I'm delighted to welcome you to this series of webinars made possible through the dedicated efforts of the experienced educators at the Institute for Collaborative Learning, the Ministry of Public Education, and the U.S. Embassy. Teaching English is both a rewarding and challenging task, requiring continuous growth, adaptation, and learning. These webinars will serve as a valuable platform to expand your knowledge, exchange ideas, and explore new, innovative methodologies. Together, you will reach new levels in your teaching practice and inspire your students to excel in English. I encourage you all to actively engage, to participate wholeheartedly, and to share your own experiences and perspectives. By collaborating with one another, you can build a vibrant network of English teachers in Costa Rica, united by a common goal to inspire your students and shape their futures through the power of language. I cannot thank you enough for your hard work and dedication to your profession. On behalf of the U.S. Embassy in Costa Rica, I welcome you again, and may this series of webinars be a productive and interesting experience for you. Buena suerte en su proceso de aprendizaje. Adelante.
Muy buenas tardes para todos y todas. Un cordial y afectuoso saludo a la señora Mary, al señor Matthew, al señor Iván del Instituto de Aprendizajes Colaborativo de la Embajada de Estados Unidos. A mi equipo de asesores, asesoras nacionales de educación preescolar, al señor Manuel Rojas. A ustedes, asesor y asesoras regionales de inglés y de educación preescolar, y este equipo de docentes que hoy se encuentran en este espacio de desarrollo profesional. Junto con la Embajada de Estados Unidos hemos coordinado 3 webinarios. Uno en el ámbito de la mediación pedagógica, otro en el ámbito de la evaluación de los aprendizajes y finalmente otro en el ámbito del uso de la tecnología como un recurso más de aprendizaje. Lo que queremos con esto es ofrecerles a ustedes, con este equipo de expertos, una serie de recursos, de experiencias, de herramientas para que puedan hacer de sus prácticas pedagógicas prácticas significativas, oportunas, pertinentes, donde los niños y niñas logren desarrollar competencias lingüísticas para que puedan expresarse, comunicarse en un segundo idioma. Hoy agradezco profundamente a la Embajada de Estados Unidos y a este grupo de expertos que con muy buena voluntad pues están hoy acá para enriquecernos, y a ustedes aprovechen esta gran oportunidad. ¿Qué es lo que queremos? Pues el desarrollar una educación preescolar bilingüe, pero de calidad, en ambientes significativos para los niños y niñas, y donde ustedes se sientan bien, desarrollando pues unas prácticas pedagógicas novedosas, creativas, innovadoras y contextualizadas. Gracias por estar acá. Gracias por aprovechar estos ambientes. Y gracias por ser transformadores de la educación preescolar bilingüe de este país.
Okay, with no further ado, Matt, why don't you take it away?
Hey there, everyone. I'm glad you're here. I'd like to get us started. And I'd like to get us started, as all good teachers do, with a moment of attendance. But instead of me calling your name and you calling back present, if you could take a moment to click on the link that I just shared out with chat, or scan that QR code on your screen, and in about 5 minutes, fill out this formal attendance form. This is how we report the impact of today's webinar to our partners at MEP and the US Embassy. And so we'd really appreciate you taking the time to do that. The more you share with us about being here, the more we can share with our partners, and the more likely we are to be able to create spaces like this with you again in the future. So I'll be sending that link out throughout our call. Make sure if there's multiple people here on the same device that you each take some time to fill out our registration. And I can see that number, so I'll keep reminding us until we all get there. While we're doing that, I also want to start off with a little moment of community building. So today our webinar is called Eyes, Ears, Mouth, and Nose, thinking about the different senses that we have and the different ways of expression our students have, and how we can use that output and input to assess learning in the preschool classroom. So before we think in particular about eyes, ears, mouth, and nose as reflection tools, I want to think about our eyes, ears, mouth, and nose just to get us started and connecting. So think about these super forces. So I'd like you to look at the screen and you can see some superpowers. I want you to think, which of these superpowers would you like to have? Would you like supervision, super hearing, super voice, super smelling? I couldn't think about touch. I couldn't bring it down to just one. So I have 3: super grip, super sensitivity, or super strength. Which of these super powers would you choose to have if you could choose? I think I'd choose supervision, not supervision, supervision. I think being able to see really, really far away, like spotting birds and sloths up in the trees. Let's keep moving. If you want to keep sharing, please feel free to do so in chat, but I'm going to keep us moving forward. I want to give you super learning. I like it, Ivan. I want to give you an overview of where we're at in our webinar series. We're currently on the second day of offering the Eyes, Ears, Mouth, and Nose webinar, which is the second in our preschool webinar series. And you'll see that coming up in 2 weeks, we've got another preschool focused webinar, Learning, Playing, and Screening, the integral role of the teacher in the use of technology in preschool learning. Following that, we'll have 2 weeks in June and another week in July, where there are 3 all MEP webinars that are for teachers and educators, regardless of the age of students you work with. And those will be focused on teacher well-being, well-being in the classroom, and then reflection and lesson planning. So take a screenshot now. Hi, everyone. I'm Matt. I see a lot of familiar faces from the first webinar, even more familiar faces from other Institute for Collaborative Learning projects. And I'm excited to see some new faces and names out there as well. I'm here to talk with you today about seeing and assessing learning, in particular in the preschool space. Last time in our first webinar, I was talking about how my arrival to teaching preschool, when I got to La Fortuna for my first preschool teaching gig, was a lot of challenge. I remember coming in a young hotshot teacher thinking I could take on anything and really struggling for the first few months. And I think a lot of those struggles were tied into my own expectations and my own ego. And I think as I developed these skills of how to see and assess the learning that is happening in preschool, I think that was the big shift that was made. I don't know if it was necessarily that I started doing things differently, but I realized that the way I need to look at learning, especially with very young learners, is ever so slightly different. So I want to explore that space with you today and think about some tips and ideas and approaches that we can use to help assess and observe learning in the young learner classroom. Today, here are some of the things I'd like to discuss and think about with you all. First, a general discussion of where we're at in terms of assessing learning. What are the things we're doing in our classroom right now to have a sense of where our learners are at in their process of learning? I want to think a little bit about the purpose of assessment and what our goal is when we assess learning. I want to think metaphorically with you all and think about what seeing learning is in our own experiences. I want to examine assessment tools and think about which tools in particular will help us to collect information about the learning process. And then I want to finish up thinking about different spaces of assessment that we can create around our learning classrooms to help all of our learners shine. Now, let's get started with a discussion. Enough of just me talking. I'd love to hear your thoughts, so feel free to open up your microphone and share, or add some ideas in chat as well. The first discussion question I'd like to share with you is, how and when do you assess learners and learning in your preschool classroom? And remember, I don't just mean test learners, right? That's one type of assessment. That's a formal summative assessment. But all assessment, all of the moments in which you're looking at learning and thinking, how's it going? How and when are the moments that you find as a teacher to assess learning in your preschool classroom? Are there any specific parts of your day where you feel like this is the time when you really switch into observer mode?
So for me, assessing, to be honest, it's like my every second checkpoint. I don't want to say a daily because it's not daily. I mean, for me, assessment, it's like every second that I'm with them. Because I get to assess like social skills, or I get to assess how are we standing with, I don't know, fine motor skills or cutting or scissors, all of it. But for me, the way that I always like to see assessment is that checking point. I don't want to say it's the startup, that assessment is the startup of my guiding plan, but it's my checking point, like how everyone is doing, because I get to see them individually. I cannot expect to see all of them having the same scissor skills, cutting scissor skills. I have to see them. But then from that checking point that I get to do that assessment, that checking point, then from that, it's where it takes me to next time. What are we going to do next time? What can I bring in? How can I modify my lesson plan? Which are the interventions that I can do with my student in the classroom and outside? What can I do with the parent? That's all I do every time that I'm doing that assessment, that checkpoint, to see where am I going. I do go back and see what has happened in the past, so I get to understand which might be like the breakups there that leads to what we're doing right now. But I get to see it more like this is what's happening at the present, and it's my guiding point then for my future, what I'm going to do afterwards. So at the end, where we get to do that evaluation, then we can create like a brand new plan for the following year as it is or so. That's the way that I see assessment.
Nice. Thanks for sharing those thoughts, Adriana. It's nice to hear how integral that role of assessment is in your classroom. And I think that makes a lot of sense. I think assessment is a really important part of all learning. And especially when we're talking about very young learners, having a higher frequency of assessment is important, right? Think about a preschooler. If they start your year and they're 3 years old, and they finish their year and they're 4 years old, there's a really big difference there, right? To me, there's a much bigger difference between a 3-year-old and a 4-year-old than a 15-year-old and a 16-year-old. Like, they probably got a little calmer, maybe a tiny bit taller. Their voice might have gotten a little deeper. But developmentally, the 15 and 16-year-old are in much more similar places than a 3-year-old and a 4-year-old, right? So if my student's life is shorter and every additional week of class is a much bigger chunk of that life, then I need to be making sure I'm taking time to check in with my learners all throughout the learning process. Because every day, every week of our class is another big addition to the overall time they've spent learning. Does anyone else have any thoughts they want to share about how and when you assess learning in your preschool classroom? I found center time to be a really nice time for assessment for me. I think with centers, I put in a lot of preparation time ahead of class, right? I make sure the worksheets and the materials and everything is ready and set and organized and just out of reach. So it's ready for center time. And then once everything is set up, I think that's one of the moments in the day where I have space to just step back, not too far back, but just metaphorically back for a couple minutes and see what students do. And I love really observing the moments when young learners are making choices, right? I think in that center moment, what choices students make is such a rich thing to assess, right? Oh, who's going to the drawing table? Oh, of course, Alana's going to the drawing table. She goes there every day. Is she going to go there tomorrow? Is she going to go there tomorrow? Oh my gosh, Alana didn't go to the drawing table. Which table did she go to? Blocks, right? So that's one big way I can assess learners. Another way I can look at that moment is who is my student going with? Because sometimes students go to a center to work on that thing. And sometimes they go to a center because their friend is going to that center, right? And maybe that's another piece I can assess with and think, oh, Alana didn't go to the drawing center. She went to the block center with Juan Diego. And now I'm starting to see more of the picture there and starting to understand how she's developing from a more individual activity focused mindset to a more interconnected and social mindset. So that's a moment I really like to assess in my class. What challenges do you face while assessing preschoolers? Is there anything you find challenging in the preschool space when it comes to assessment?
For me, one of the challenges that I get for assessing my kids, and it is part of our context, it's like attendance. Like, since they miss school so much from time to time, then it's hard for me to follow like that progress within the assessment. And I just saw it, I think it was today, that he was writing his name, and we have made a great progress of him writing his name. He was just missing a couple of letters, and it was okay. I mean, it's okay. We're getting into that progress. But then he missed school for like 4 or 5 days because he was sick. And today when he was writing his name, it was backwards and it was crazy. And so like, okay, I cannot assess him, or I shouldn't be assessing right now because of course we lost track. But then what happened that he got lost of the practice that we were having in class. So sometimes that part of like the attendance or being able to keep track of them. And yes, what Ana says, the backup support at home, yes, that it's a challenge as well. I mean, at least for us that we're doing English immersion or English within the Hornas or whatever, it is that challenge. I'm not going to say that it's going to be impossible, but we do have that tiny challenge because it's out of our hands. Even though I can try to bring techniques, tools, or ideas for my parents, or even send them videos that they can keep watching at home, it's not the same instruction that the teacher can do, right? So I think that the challenge is most of it for the things that are outside of our control area. What I cannot control, that would be my challenge for sure.
And Adriana, I think it's a very real challenge. And I think it's not just an individual challenge, that's a whole class challenge. Because developmentally, 3 and 4-year-olds are still learning about the boundaries of personal space, right? So even you can put masks on preschoolers. We've done it. It's possible. They're still going to touch each other. They're still going to drool all over everything. Like, many of those students are going to get sick because one of the developments they're going through is learning about personal boundaries and health. So they're not experts with those topics. So it's not a question of, can the teacher make sure that it's developmentally, they need time to learn that skill. So it's also, now I've got one student out for 4 days. They're going to slip back a little bit. And then that's going to kind of snowball around the classroom, and I'll just have 1 or 2 students out for cold season. And so I really feel that challenge, right? It also, if I'm trying to take a moment in time, like mid-class assessment snapshot, right, and do something more official, something like that can really throw a wrench in my assessment process. Anna also adds in chat language barriers. And Freddie writes, sometimes it's hard to have it clear what we are to assess.
Hey, Matt.
Hi there.
I'm Myling, and nice to see you again. I already saw you in other workshops, so hey. This is my first year working with a preschool students. And I think everything is a challenge this year for me, like teaching pre-K students, but especially with the maternal students. I think I don't know yet how to deal with the students that are crying at this point. I
Mhm.
have, in my case, especially, I have two students who are going to class, yes, but when they arrive, they start crying and crying and crying, and they don't want to do anything, just cry, and it's hard because they cry hard. You know what I mean? I can even listen myself or listening others because they are almost screaming and crying.
Mhm.
So this is a challenge because like I said before, this is my first year, and I used to deal with students from first grade to sixth grade,
Mhm.
and this is interesting. I think it's a challenge also for me, and now I need to get used to and have I don't know, maybe understand and learn some techniques to make them feel comfortable in my class, in my English class. I think they cry not only with me, they cry also with the teacher, but in general, they don't want to be there. I think it's a moderation thing. I don't know. Maybe they are too young and they feel like they miss their parents. I don't know, but I will figure out. But for me, this is my biggest challenge.
Thanks for sharing, Mylene. I think your big challenge connects to what one of my big challenges too. I noticed how at the end of your story, you're left at this place of feeling maybe, right? Maybe this, maybe that. I don't know. And when I look at that in general and I think about that's a child who his level of experiencing the world has outpaced their ability to express themselves, right? That child is feeling something and doesn't yet know how to express that. That's how I'm interpreting that moment, right? And so you're left guessing. They're crying and you know something's amiss. Some need isn't being met, but you don't know if it's a need for safety, a need for security, a need for privacy, a need for familiarity. You can't know what that need is because a cry could mean a lot of different things. To me, it connects with my big challenge, which is silence, right? I know that a lot of 3 and 4 year olds, they're quiet, regardless of what language we're speaking in. Like in their first languages, they're quiet or they don't talk to people outside of their family. They're just coming out of that silent period, right? They might be. Like not every student, but some of them might still just be emerging from silence in their first language. And so the introduction of a second language is going to draw that back out again, right? And like crying, I don't know exactly how to interpret silence. When I give my students something to do and their response is no, I'm not going to do it. I'm going to sit here silently and do nothing. I don't know what that means, right? And so I agree with you on what can we do to try and tease out information, right? Or try to come to an understanding or even give skills. If I could offer a little suggestion, um, again, I don't know what's inside of it, right? There's no way for me to figure that out until that child learns to express themselves. But one practice we had in our classroom that I felt like really helped in moments like this was called Esquina de Paz. And we set up a little tent in the corner and we were trying to do English immersion. Like the goal was as much English as possible. And very intentionally, we called this La Esquina de Paz. And we explained to the students, siempre si necesitas un momento para ti mismo, puede levantarse y irse a la esquina de paz. Y no, nosotros no le vamos a quitar de ahí. Y puede mantener ahí el tiempo que quiere. Right? I'm still reflecting and trying to figure out exactly why. But I felt like having a place to go gives another way for a child to express that which is unexpressible, right? In that moment when tears feel like the only way they have to communicate to you what they're feeling, Getting able to stand up, walk across the classroom, and sit down inside of a little tent where no one else can see them, that's a different way they can show to you, I'm not ready to learn yet, right? I'm still working on something in here, and that's okay, right? I think one of the real challenges with Materno, Mylene, is that that's where they're at, right? Those kids aren't crying because you're doing something wrong. That's what they're working on. That's the growth and the learning that's deep in those children's hearts, right? And so for you, it's this challenging process of how do I guide you when I'm not exactly sure where you're going, right? And so for me, this is one way to put options in front of a student so that I'm not saying they're going to jump straight in and start participating in your class. But if I can start offering them options, I might be able to get them to express more so I can understand more of what they're going through. Freddie, you're thinking about something that I want to talk about later, which is we can do a lot of observation in the classroom, but how do we bring in this process of recording information in a way that can help us, right? And what does that mean specifically for preschool? So I have some interesting thoughts on that later on, and I'm curious to see what you think as well. And he also shares that sometimes silence might mean they're processing input. Absolutely, right? Silence can be a good thing. I just have to approach silence with a lot of curiosity. All righty, one more question. I have a magic box. Do you know that? And inside of my magic box, there are all things. That's right. Everything is inside of my magic box. And I would like to offer you one thing from my magic box. So what fantastical treasure from my magic box would you like that would make assessing preschoolers easier for you? If you could have anything. For me, it would be an infinite box of Legos that automatically cleans itself up when you're done. Because then I could give it to most of my students and say, hey, play with these Legos. And I could take groups of them off to the side to do some assessment work while all of the others were totally entertained and totally locked in working with the Lego. And then when we're done assessing, the magic Legos clean themselves up. That's what I'd like to pull from the magic box. Is there any magical treasures you would all like me to look in my box for you for? I guess if you're in a situation like Mylene and dealing with some crying preschoolers, maybe I don't want to say headphones, but like maybe like open windows so that beautiful sounds like bird songs can mix into the classroom.
Maybe within my magic box, to be honest, what I have is do everything through games or playing. I mean, we know that for preschoolers, everything it's a game, or we should do everything as a game, because then I'm gonna get them more motivated, more into it, meaning that they're gonna try their hardest. But also, like before talking to them that we're gonna do a game, I always like do that tiny pep talk about growth mindset, like, hey, we're gonna be doing this and this. It's okay if you make mistakes, and I go and I tell them all that so they feel comfortable, because then I get a chance to really assess what it's in there. And for them to see it as a game or that we're just playing, it makes it easier. And then within that, it's observation that it's going to help me saying, okay, we did this game like the other day we were playing. I was telling them, okay, I'm going to make a sound. And within all of you, you need to create that sound as a letter, okay, within your body. But like every person, it's a part of the letter, right? So we were working most of it with vowels because that's what I wanted it to assess at that moment. If we had that structure in our minds on how to create the letter A based on the sound. And I told them, but this is a challenge, this is a game, and they were so into it and they did perfectly. And I was able to see who likes to do collaborative work, who is able to understand like the shapes of the letters and all of it. And so those are kind of the things that I like to do within my magic box in order to assess. I really try to make it fun, entertaining, and as a game. Or even I do use the word challenge, and they love when I say, "Oh, we're gonna have a challenge," and they go like, "Ooh," and they really get into it. So those are kind of my things in my magic box.
Right there with you, Adriana. I think one of my safety nets in the preschool classroom is I always need at least one toy hiding in my backpack that they've never seen. Like, if everything just starts falling apart, I know I can always just like, wait, have you seen these? And suddenly the tears stop and I'm like, look, the world is blue. Do you want, like, you always have to have one in reserve. And I like how you circled it back around and connected it with assessment. One of the things I've been thinking about this week is that I think one thing we talk about in teaching a lot is motivation, right? And I'm going to make a bold claim. I think preschoolers almost always have very little reason to feel intrinsically motivated about English, right? Like, what's a preschooler going to do? I'm going to travel to the United States this summer. Like, they're not like, the language isn't going to give new opportunities to them, right? In the same way that you learn to ride a bike, oof, now you're mobile, right? That's new power to a child. Whereas a language doesn't convert into new powers for children for a really long time. And so that's why I think this moment of taking something that is deeply motivating, right? The kind of intrinsically joyous exploration that comes with play in a game or a toy. What's really important about that in assessment is it's going to pull the best out of our students, right? It's going to give them something that is deeply connected to what intrinsically motivates them. And that's going to let us see their best. So, fortunately for you, I have a box full of toys, both magical and real. So you're getting plenty of those. And Maritza in chat is requesting from the Magic Box flashcards and guessing games for assessing students. Nice. Alrighty, y'all. I want to take a little pause to think about the purpose of assessment. And what better way to think about assessment than a pop quiz? That's everyone's favorite type of formal summative assessment. So to start off this pop quiz, I'd like to ask you, what is formative assessment? When we say formative assessment, that's a term you've heard before. If you've heard it before, think of this as a chance to review. If you've never heard it before, think of it as a fun chance to guess. Formative assessment. Is that assessment before learning to set a mark of where students begin? Is that an assessment during learning, formal or informal, about the process of learning? Or is it formal and informal assessment after learning experience to measure? And it can be more than one. Which do you think is formative assessment? In chat, Adriana and Astrid both come in quick with a B. Adriana shifts and thinks, well, maybe it's kind of A and B. That's okay. You sent it before I told you you could choose more than one, so I will allow that pencil addition. Maritza's also thinking that assessment during the learning process. I'm with you on that. When I think of formative assessment, I'm usually thinking of either formal or informal assessment during the process of learning, right? So as learning is happening, I'm assessing, right? It's not the start or an end. It's a hand-in-hand process, similar to a lot of the comments we were thinking about before, right? When I heard you talking about that, I was thinking, this connects to that fancy word, formative assessment. Adriana?
Yes, it's because in my head, I do have like diagnostic tests, formative and summative, but there are times like certain texts or research says that diagnostic can be formative. And some others said that it's completely different. So I would like your input on it because that's one that I still get to struggle. And even with my college students, we talk about a lot of it. Like, is it really diagnostic, formative or not?
I think the different kinds of assessment are more similar than we make them out to be. I think we've given ourselves these different categories because our logical brains like sorting things into tinier boxes. But I think the reality is these things are like these, I'm so excited for what's about to happen. They're like these lenses right? And you can have something that is formative and you can have something that is diagnostic, and you can overlap them and get this kind of cool mix color that's both of them at once. Oh, I should keep these on my desk more often. Because later on, I want to show you an example of a piece of summative assessment that I was asked to create. And I didn't think that in a traditional sense it would be fair. And so I created a formative summative assessment. My version of that, right? Again, that's me mixing these lenses and trying to get to that color in between. Alrighty. Next question, summative assessment. Which one or more of these is summative assessment? Hi there, Alex. Nice to see you. We're just getting started thinking about purposes of assessment. Summative assessment. A, B, C, or more than one of the above. Also, if you feel like the last two slides have confused you more than helped you, and you're like, I'm starting to mix up formative and summative assessment, I think the next two slides are really going to help with that. So if you feel like I've taken you a step into confusion, give me 3 more steps, and then we'll see what questions you have. All right, I see a lot of C's coming in. Now, before I show you the next slide, I want to lead you to the correct answer. Now, I've just started a new diet. My partner and I were working on this diet together. It's no carbs, right? No rice, no tortillas. Actually, I eat like a little bit of carbs, but it's supposed to be 0 carbs. And I think it's going well. I think it's working. Right now I weigh 155 pounds. What do you think? Is it working? I've given you my data. That's a formal measurement at the end of 2 weeks of my diet. So I've taken a summative assessment of that. After 2 weeks, at the end, measured 155. What do you think? Is it a good diet? Should I keep doing it? Well, one of the challenges there is that I've told you the weight in pounds. And if you're like me, I can't think back and forth between pounds and kilos. I can figure out some other conversions, but that one really gets me. Another challenge there is I don't know if I've given you enough information, right? I've given you a measurement at the end, but if I don't give you any other measurement, you can't see change. So when I think of summative, that prefix sum makes me think of things coming together, right? Like summation in math. And that makes me think about being at the end. But I also recognize that in order for me to measure something at the end, I need to measure it at the start as well, right? I need to be able to start trying to see that change. And so I just want to bring that point up there. Now, again, you might have a textbook or a professor out there who's telling you that's actually called diagnostic assessment. If that helps you think about that, that works too, right? But I like to think about those moments as a pair that come together. So it's helpful for me to think of that as one kind of process, this measurement at the start and at the end, and to contrast that with formative assessment, which is this ongoing in the middle, right? So this is like this diagnostic summative bookends, and formative is all about exploring the mountains and valleys in between. Alrighty, last interactive slide for now. I've got 4 fancy words and colorful bubbles on the screen, and I want you to try and sort these words out. Which 2 of these bubbles do you think are going to go under assessment for learning? And which 2 of these bubbles are going to go under assessment of learning? Take a little bit to think about that. You might be guessing, you might not have heard of these top terms, but that's okay. I'm going to talk about them on the next slide. So I'm going to give you 30 seconds to guess, and you can just think in your head. Don't worry about typing anything. This will be a little moment of self-assessment. But which 2 go where? Mm-hmm. I think we're headed in the right direction. So I really connect that for there to formative assessment, right? Assessment for learning. I think one of the main ways to do assessment for learning, not the only way, but one of the main ways is formative assessment. Whereas assessment of learning is that more measuring process of summative assessment, right? But formative assessment that is during the learning process tends to be assessment for learning, right? Assessment where the goal is I'm doing this assessment to make more learning happen, right? Like I'm going to take a little bit of time away from teaching to do the assessing. Assessing is part of teaching, right? But I'm going to focus on just assessing for a moment to make more learning happen in the future. When I think of formative assessment for learning, I'm thinking of these three maxims. First, it's a continuous part of the learning process, right? So just as I'm always trying to guide learners forward by every 5 or 10 minutes, giving them some new direction to continue in, I'm also making that ongoing commitment to taking time and finding moments to look at learners and make observations about their learning so that I can gather that information and use it for something in the future, right? It also motivates the learner to keep learning, right? So formative assessment should make the learner want to learn more. To me, it's the opposite effect of I go to classroom, I take a test, I fail, and then I want to quit. That's it, Mom. I'm never studying English again, right? That's the opposite of the goal of assessment for learning. Assessment for learning should give the learner more motivation. It should be a motivating, not a demotivating process. And finally, for it to really be assessment and not just observation, it has to help guide the teacher towards creating future learning. I can do lots of observation. I can spend all day watching my learners and thinking, wow, look at Roxana go. Hey, Eddie's doing it. Oh, great job, Eddie. But if that observation doesn't become reflection and a plan for the future, I'm not really doing assessment, right? I'm doing observation, which is nice. But when I take observation and through reflection, put it in action, that process is assessment, right? That's me saying, what's going on and what will I do tomorrow because of that? So I'm really trying to channel all three of those things into my assessment for learning moment. And that's the type of assessment I want to focus on for the rest of today. What can we do to create moments that are like this, where they're part of our everyday routines, so they fit into the busy day of a preschool teacher? I promise to give you something small that fits. I'm not trying to say, you're a preschool teacher. That means you've got what, like 2 extra hours every day to do busy work at your desk? No, I know you don't have that time. So we're going to see what's something that's bite-sized and fits into the quick breaks of a preschool classroom. What are ways that we can gather this information that matches learner needs so that learners stay motivated? And how can we take this information and process it towards future learning? Any questions about this or other terms before we move on to the next color slide? Freddie, that's something I've been thinking about a lot, right? I think one place that I want to learn more from in terms of giving feedback is video games. Because I've watched my students sit there at recess and they play that crazy game where it's just like a square jumping through other geometric shapes, and it looks so difficult. And they'll just try it and lose like 75, 80 times in a row. And I'm just like, what is this game figured out where this student can just fail and be like, nope, still motivated. I'm going to get it next time. I feel like there's something really, really positive that you've pulled out of that process that really connects to this idea of the learners getting feedback that it's not working, right? They keep losing this video game, but they stay motivated and moving forward and thinking, next time I'll get it. I think that's an awesome example of these three concepts in real life and something I'm trying to pull into my teaching more. Like, How do I, as a teacher, give feedback that feels like a video game and keeps spiraling energy forward the same way I see our children doing that? Alrighty, I want to pull some creativity out of you all. I've visited your classrooms. I've seen those gorgeous posters and incredible handouts y'all make, and the beautiful coloring examples you do as well. And so I want to tap into that artistic ability of this core of young learner teachers. And I want to think about that creativity with words. So I want you to finish this sentence prompt. I want to think about observing learning in the preschool classroom. And I want to invite you to make a simile or metaphor. What other activity or place or thing is observing learning in the preschool class like? Is it like a bus stop or a supermarket? Is it like a trombone or a bassoon? Is it like an ocean or a jungle? What simile or metaphor would you make? Observing learning in the preschool classroom is like. I'm going to give you a minute or two to think and share your ideas, and then I'll share mine with you. But I want to wait so that I don't squash out your creativity. Think of that moment. You've gotten all the materials out. No one has a question yet. You just get a minute and a half. 90, that's too long. 70 glorious seconds before everyone starts shooting up their hand and needing your help. You get to watch your learners learn for 70. Clock is ticking 65 seconds. What's that moment of observing like? 60 seconds times. Adriana, you have something you want to share?
No, that I think I already got my answer.
Cool. What's your metaphor?
I think it's observing learning in the preschool classroom. It's like Thanksgiving dinner. Like you have so much at the table, so much, and then you get to have like that encounter of culture and conversations and people getting a little bit of this and a little bit of that, and every plate is different.
Mhm.
So that's what I'm trying, like that's like how I'm seeing it. Like every plate, it's my students' brain, and they get a little bit of maybe the sweet potatoes and these and that. And that's the way that I'm seeing it. Like when we're sitting at Thanksgiving dinner, we have so many things in there. Everyone is getting what they want, what they need. But then someone is already at the table observing everyone, what do they need? I mean, like grandmas, they're always like, do you need something extra? Do you need extra gravy? Do you need an extra drink? There is someone always there. So that's kind of the way that I'm seeing it. It's weird, but that's the way that I'm seeing it.
I love the metaphor, and I was happy you put some ideas behind it too, and thinking about how every learner is getting a different mix of learning from the smorgasbord of learning that we've got. I was also thinking of like it the other way, that like for me as the diner, maybe I'm hungry and that's why. I was like, I know on Thanksgiving, I have to be strategic. If I just put food on my plate because it looks delicious, I'm going to have a mountain. I've got to really be, and I was thinking, okay, in preschool, I've got so much information flying at me. Like I don't have time to document all of the data that I could observe.
Yeah.
So it's also this strategic process of like, what information should I collect that's going to help? That's a cool.
And the only way that you are going to get that is once dinner is over, you will see what are the leftovers.
What are the leftovers? I like that. Well, that's cool. And I'm like, how do I set up the materials in my classroom so that at the end I have leftovers to assess? I don't know where that leads me, but I think it leads me somewhere cool. Thanks for sharing. In chat, Freddie shares, observing learning in the preschool classroom is like going to a magic show. I really like that. I'm a big magic fan. One of the things I really like about magic is that there's this concept in magic called the turn. And the turn is when the magic trick has already been done, but the audience doesn't know it yet. Right? Like the magician has done something secret, but you don't know it's been done. And then after the trick is actually done, there's some kind of flourish or distraction. And then poof, magic. Right? So there's something done, this extended pause and a flash, and then the magic is revealed. And I really like that metaphor, thinking about these young learners where there's this trick of learning. And what might follow might be this long pause with this surprising moment, and then poof, language emerges. Beautiful metaphor, right? Well, what I'd like to share is this. I think observing learning in the preschool classroom is like bird watching. If you know how to look, where to look, when to look, and what you're looking for, with a little bit of luck and a lot of patience, you will see something of real beauty. Earlier on, I think the skill one person was requesting was super patience. It was Mary over there. I think that's a big part of it too. I remember when I first moved to Costa Rica, my roommate was an avid bird watcher. He would wake up every morning at 4:30 a.m. to go watch birds, which was crazy. I'm not a morning person. He was very excited. And it was interesting to me because every day he would wake up, he would walk the same path at the same time with the same binoculars. But every day he would see different birds, right? And I think that's really a part of this process that sticks out for me right now, is thinking about how there's an element of chance here, right? On which day will learning emerge? I don't know, right? And so I've got to be willing to go and sit down in that classroom, hold my binoculars up, watch keenly the learners, and wait. Wait patiently, right? Not be squeezing at them. Come on, Juan Diego, speak, right? But to wait with patience and know, I know what I'm looking for. I know when to look. I'm just going to wait, and there it is, right? And I think maybe that's why I'm a bad bird watcher, and probably something to reflect on. And how does that come up in the classroom, right? But that act of just sitting and waiting patiently for something to happen to me is a big part of this observation process. Alrighty. Another question for you all to wrap your brains around: assessment tools and strategies. Which of these tools can we use for assessment? A whole class checklist, a rubric, an individual checklist, observation notes, or all of the above? And I agree with you. Maybe you used your test taking skills to deduce, hey, he didn't have that last time, but now it's here. Maybe that's a sign. Maybe you tapped into your teaching knowledge and you're like, I recognize those. Those are definitely tools. But I agree with the same answer you all have. All of these and more are possible tools to assess learning, right? So I want to think through these things again with the lens of preschool. I know as an educator, these are all things that I can do. Now I want to think, which of these are going to fit best into the needs of the preschool classroom, right? Because they're just tools. There's nothing that makes a rubric better than a checklist or checklist better than observation notes. They're different tools that serve different functions, right? And just like a hammer and a screwdriver, I've got to figure out which is the tool I need. And just like I might decide that a hammer isn't an appropriate tool to bring into a preschool classroom because it's going to create more problems than solutions, I also have to figure out which assessment tool is really going to fit in here and serve me as a teacher rather than creating one more thing for me to have to worry about. So I want to talk through giving you examples of what each of these might look like in a preschool setting, and then thinking about the pros and cons of using them with young learners, right? And again, I think of this as a spectrum. I know some of you out there don't just teach preschool. I think these ideas apply to preschoolers and young learners, right, on this tangent, and that the younger the learners are, the more so I find them on this end. Alrighty, let's think first through a whole class checklist. A whole class checklist might be something like what you're seeing on the right of the screen. An example that I'm guessing almost all of you have used before is attendance. Attendance is an assessment tool, right? You're gathering data that's helping you collect information on learning. At the end of the semester, if Eduardo's mom comes in and is very upset with you, how come my student doesn't know English? And you look at the attendance and you go, how come your student only came to 20% of the classes, right? Like, that's giving us information that can understand the output of learning, right? And that is one formal, ongoing way to track data about the learning process. So that's a whole class checklist. That's one way to use it. But there's lots of other ways I could use that checklist, right? I could think of some other category, right? Like maybe it's center time and I want to say, which of my students is speaking English when they're at their centers? And I just walk around the room while they're in their centers and I'm just seeing that everyone's good. And every time I hear someone start to say words in English, I think, oh, yep, that was Sara, that was Isabella, that was Isaac. And then I walk over to my desk, check, check, check. And then I keep walking around the room. So I could use a simple checklist like this to gather a point of data about all of my students, right? For me, that's one of the pros. I can assess many students at once, right? I know that in preschool especially, I feel the effects of a big classroom, right? A big preschool classroom to me feels really big. It feels like I'm being pulled in a lot of different directions at once because each learner needs a lot more of me as the adult in the room. So when I'm thinking about assessment tools, the fact that something is fast is a genuine necessity, right? I don't think it's a reasonable expectation for me to suggest a strategy to any of you that says, yeah, you just need to spend 25 minutes of your day sitting at your desk, looking down at a sheet of paper and not looking at your students, right? I think that's a luxury that I have not felt most of the time I've been in a preschool classroom. So I need a tool that's going to keep up with the fast pace of my classroom. And for me, a whole class checklist is a fast tool to use. I could pull out my phone, have a note in there, and be taking this kind of information down as I'm walking around the classroom. Now, for me, the con here is there's not a lot of space for detail or definition. Maybe I could track two things at once. Maybe I could go around the room and say, who's speaking English to their peers, who's speaking Spanish to their peers. And I could track all of their language use. But I think if I start to do more than two columns at once for the whole class, I think we're going to end up more confused and lost in notes than getting quality data from us, right? And I could maybe do like a simple 1-star, 2-star, 3-star in each little box to get a little bit more evaluative, but I'm really limited with how much information. So this is a nice tool to collect a tiny bit of information about everybody very quick. I think this is something I would recommend you try out in some ways in the preschool classroom. Next tool, rubric. A rubric for me is more detailed than a checklist. I think of it like a checklist in 2 dimensions, right? For each thing that we're checking off, it's not just a simple yes or no. There's different descriptors of is it not yet, sometimes, or often, as you can see on this example below. So I think rubrics are very nice when we need lots of detail, right? If I'm providing end of the year feedback that I'm going to share with a parent, I want to make sure I'm sharing a lot of detail. I want that parent to know how important their child is to me and to know how much time I've spent observing their child's learning so that I can share with them what I've seen, right? So I need a tool that's going to let me collect and share that kind of detail. It can also help if I'm doing some kind of assessment connected to set standards, because oftentimes standards have a lot of details that need to be accounted for, and there's space in a rubric for a lot of details. So those are, to me, the pros. Now the cons. A rubric is slow, right? Every little box isn't just one decision. It's 3, 4, or 5 decisions baked into one, right? So each written note requires a lot more time. Now, here's the other con for me. When I'm using rubrics in elementary school, middle school, high school, or beyond, I can take the rubric and give it to the students. And if we're working on a project all week, they can look at the rubric and go, Mai, venga, no hemos hecho eso. Ah, right? The rubric can be a tool that helps the students as they're learning. because those students are literate. Now, in the preschool classroom, our students are developing pre-literacy skills. So the rubric is not going to help them the way it would help a student who knows how to read. That's why, in general, I tend to not use rubrics in the preschool classroom. I find that it ends up being slower than I really have the time for, right? If I'm going to do a full-on rubric, I might be able to get through one of those in a day because I'm going to need to keep coming back and watching Eduardo speak again and again and again. And by the time I've gathered enough information to fill out every little box, well, the day's over, right? And then I need to come back the next day and assess Ava. And now, just to do one round of assessment, it could take me 2 weeks to get my whole class through that, right? And I can't do that all the time. Maybe I do that near the beginning and the middle and the end of my year, right? So maybe for bigger, more formal summative assessments, you might integrate some of these rubric-y elements. But I think in the day-to-day assessment and observation, it doesn't fit. I think it's not fast enough, and it's too based on words to help the students. So this is one that I would say most of the time not. Now, you are seeing an example on the bottom of a rubric that I made for a preschool classroom. Again, this was a summative end of the year document to be shared with parents. So as a communication tool, now a rubric makes sense because the person receiving the rubric can read it. And I want to respect the parent's literacy, right? So that's what made me lean into a rubric here. Whereas if it's just a random Tuesday and I'm trying to see how people are doing during center time, I'm not going to use a rubric. Next up, the individual checklist. For me, the individual checklist feels like a hybrid of the two tools that we just talked about, right? So when I'm thinking about an individual checklist, here you're seeing a sample of one. This is Itzel. Hi, Itzel. You're a sweetie. You're probably twice as big now, and I'm super excited that you're reading. So for Itzel, I have a sheet of paper here. And on November 6th, when she comes into class, I take some time to observe Itzel. And every time I see her demonstrating one of these abilities, at least in part of the day, I put a check mark to say, today Itzel demonstrated that skill. This document gives me a lot of space to track a lot of different things going on with Itzel's speaking and language ability, right? So I get the space for more details than just a whole class checklist, but it's not so many details like a rubric that it's really slow for me to use, right? I would genuinely have a clipboard and walk around the classroom, and I would just take these in like sheets of 3. I take 1, 2, 3, put them on my clipboard, and just do a walk around the classroom and make marks for those 3 students. And then I'd switch out to the next 3. And within a 25-minute center activity, I could get through my whole class, right? Me having 3 pieces of paper on a clipboard wasn't so much that if a child needed to be picked up and carried to the bathroom, I couldn't do that, right? I was still nimble enough to keep up with preschool, but I found that it led to me getting a lot more data about my students. Now, it takes a little bit more time than a whole class checklist, but I think if there's more than one thing I want to look at, I found it worthwhile to just bundle these up and go through it. And maybe if I find that I have too many students, I come up with a daily rotation and say, I'm going to do one of these, but every day I'm going to do a different 5 students, right? And so on Monday, I'll do these 5, Tuesday, I'll do these 5, Wednesday, I'll do these 5. And then next week, I'll shuffle it up. Make sure you're not always assessing the same students on Monday. You know what? You know how I learned that? Itzel right here, she looks sweet, but that's because it's the afternoon. Itzel es una dormilona. She loves to sleep in. And on the weekends, her parents would tell us she'd sleep in at our grandparents' house until like 11 o'clock in the morning. So she'd get to school on Monday. She was mad. She was angry, and she was telling us because she was sleepy, right? So I also have to make sure if I'm going to rotate on different days that I'm mixing those days up too. So that some of my time assessing Itzel is, what are you doing on a Monday? And some of it's, what are you doing on a Wednesday after you've had it, and have it on a Friday when you've been speaking English with me all day long. So one tip to throw out there if you're going to mix up different days. But I found that this system of having individual checklists and keeping one or two with me kept me nimble, but got a lot more information for me to work with. Alrighty, the last tool I want to think about today, observation notes. This is the tool that you all probably have the most experience using. Even if you haven't been using this term for it, maybe you don't call what you're doing observation notes. I would wager a guess that most of you do a lot of this. For me, observation notes are whenever I'm observing learning and I notice something, right? Oh, look, today is the first day that Itzel picked up that puzzle piece and said, this is the letter in my name, right? She recognized that letter. That moment of noticing that is me taking an observation note. For me, one of the pros of this is that this is a really natural and intuitive process. When we started out, Adriana and Freddie were sharing that this is just something they naturally do as teachers. Like it's hard to talk about because it's just an everyday thing. And I respect that, right? I think that's a real perspective to be coming in from, thinking, this is just what I always do. And that's one thing that makes observation notes nice. It's really natural and intuitive, and that means it's going to be the fastest and easiest. I don't need any clipboard in my hands. I just need my eyes and my brain, and I got my notes, right? Now, I think that comes with a catch. Because observation notes feel so easy, oftentimes that might lead me as a teacher to thinking, I don't need to plan anything. I'll just observe, right? But if I'm going to create this checklist, I need to take a moment to sit down when there are no children hollering my name and gasping for my attention. And I need to plan out, what am I looking for? When am I going to look? How am I going to look? So I take a lot of time to prepare for this kind of observation. So I think when we're doing informal observation just by looking and thinking, one important thing we think we need to remember is I need to still plan out these moments, right? I might not be writing anything down, but I need to take a quick 10 seconds to brainstorm in my head. What am I looking for? Where am I looking for it? How am I looking for it? Right? And come up with a plan of attack and then observe around the room, right? And then the other thing I think we need to be in the process of is, how am I going to capture this information so that I don't forget? Remember that Thanksgiving metaphor Adriana shared with us? There's a lot of information flying at us, right? I know I have had times I've had days, sometimes there's just a day. Maybe it's a rainy day. Maybe it's a day where there's no rain. Something's in the water and the kids are wild. You know what I'm talking about. We've all had that day. Everyone's wild. And you finish and you're like, that felt like a week. That one day felt like a week. And like on those days, I remember taking the bus home and just having these moments of remembering, oh my gosh, at 10 a.m., Eduardo lost his shoe. When did he find his shoe? I don't even remember that. I completely forgot about that. So many things happened today. I already forgot that he lost his shoe, right? Some days there's a lot of information and input flying at us. So if our main approach to observing and assessing learning is just looking and writing down notes in our head, we're going to lose most of the data that we collect because we're forgetful. We have a ton of stuff flying at us. We're not doing any active processing to move that information from short-term memory to long-term memory. So as more data comes in, the other stuff in our short-term memory just gets pushed out. So the picture I chose here, I chose very strategically. This is not me with longer hair. This is my wonderful co-teacher at Preschool, Maggie. And one of the wonderful things about sharing a class with another teacher, right? Maggie would teach on Monday. I would teach Tuesday, Wednesday, and then she would teach Thursday and Friday. Every time I was making observations or I saw something important, I sent Maggie a WhatsApp, right? If two students got in a fight on Monday, she let me know so that I would know on Tuesday to think about it. Now, the fact that there were two of us forced us to write it down, right? Because we wrote it down, we didn't forget. And so I know most of you don't have that joy of having a co-teacher to share your class with, but I would recommend finding somewhere for you to just journal about it, right? To at the end of your day, and it's just for you, right? You don't need a specific form or notes. Or just, I don't know, have a binder or a note on your phone or record your voice saying it. But take a little bit of time to record those important moments. Because sometimes you won't know what the pattern is until you have a few weeks of data, right? I couldn't figure out the first time that Itzel came in on a Monday that she was tired. It took noticing that every Monday for several months to really see, oh, this is the pattern, right? And so one of the favors you can do to yourself is collect the important data and then put it somewhere so that every couple of weeks you can just take a little time to review it and see, are there any patterns starting to emerge here? Because the observation is only an assessment tool when it guides the teacher towards future learning. If you're just looking at your students and smiling, that's great. You deserve that moment of celebration. Like, celebration is an important thing. Make sure you're taking your time to just look at your students and smile at the miracle and go, they're learning. It's cool, right? But also take some time to capture your notes somewhere so that future you can thank you for that, right? On Monday, you come back in and you go, wow, thanks, past Matt. I'm glad you took 3 minutes on Friday to write down some notes so that I could remember what was going on Monday morning. Any questions about any of these assessment tools before we move on to our next topic? I think it's very reasonable and rational to choose assessment tools for the young learner space based on their ease and speed of use, right? Your young learners are less independent on a basic level of motor skills. They need more of your energy and attention more frequently than other learners. And so you've got to find an assessment tool that fits into that fast-paced rhythm, right? So I want to put that out there because I know sometimes others can look at this profession and think, oh, it's easy. You're just hanging out with kids and painting, right? But I know from having taught students ages 2 to 72, preschool is a full contact sport, right? Preschool, if you wear a fitness watch, preschool fills your rings, okay? You burn calories teaching preschool, right? I do not burn the same calories teaching a group of adults that I burn teaching a class of preschoolers. And so I just want to respect the challenge of that and say that I don't think saying, oh, don't use rubrics, they take too long. Like, that's not us rationalizing laziness, right? But us understanding the real demands of our profession and how to be professionals within those demands. Alrighty, I have a self-assessment for you. This is great because it looks like a quiz, but there's no wrong answers. It's just about your preference of what you would rather do. So I'm going to read for you 3 different situations, and I want you to think to yourself, would you rather do number 1, number 2, or number 3? Feel free to share your answer in chat if you'd like, or if you just want to be remembering it for yourself, that's okay too. For first, would you rather teach a large class, tutor a small group, or offer private lessons to one student? That's all right. Maritza broke my rule, and I'm okay with people breaking my rule. Again, it's your preference. There are no wrong answers. Even the answers I told you are wrong, they're still just your preferences. So there's no wrong answers. Alrighty. Let's see if we can get some definition on the next one. Would you rather give a conference presentation about teaching, share ideas in a weekly teachers group, or create resources individually to share with other teachers in your region? Which of these 3 things would you rather do? I want you all to start choosing a favorite. They might all sound great. Which one will you do first? I'll let you do all three, but you only have time to do one of them this week. So what do you want to do this week? Ha! Trapped you in my question. All of the above. See about all of the above now. There's only one more of these. I promise if you choose numbers, it will lead to something fun. If you choose all, it might lead to something fun too. But ask yourself, which one would I do first? Which one would be them if I only could do one? Maybe they're all appealing, but if you had to choose and you only got one, because like sometimes you go to a restaurant, you look at the dessert menu and you're like, all of the above. But there are some times like the dessert menu where it's not the right decision to choose all of the above. So if you had to choose just one because you're worried about your academic caloric output. Alrighty, last question. Would you rather do a live TV interview with a journalist from La Nacion in a coffee shop, or create a blog or vlog about exciting new things you were trying in your classroom? Alrighty, y'all. Well, as our final results are rolling in, this has been my very unscientific approach at a personality test. Okay. And I want to say unscientific in that I'm not trying to sort you into a box, label you, and reveal to you something deep about yourself, like which friend's character you're most similar to. But I want to hopefully show you the next slide as a way to maybe ask yourself a question you haven't thought about before. And see what that stirs up for you. So first, before I go on to the next slide, I want you to ask yourself, was there any pattern to my responses? Was there one of these numbers that I preferred over the others more often? Was I mostly a 3? Was I a 1 2 of the times and then a 2 the other? Where were you most of the time? Because as I was coming up with these ideas, I was thinking of 3 prototypical spaces. I was thinking about this general preference between the stage, the coffee table, and the studio. I think these are 3 very different types of spaces, right? When I'm on stage, I have everyone's eyes on me. There are bright lights, cameras flashing, and it can feel electric, or it can feel terrifying, right? Sitting around a coffee table, there's many less eyes on you. But there's a strong feeling of interaction, a very social flavor there. It's informal, but it's still public. It's still shared. And then in the studio, right, locked away in your artist's studio, there's solitude. There's privacy and safety, right? There's no eyes on you, an unlimited amount of time if you've got enough energy to stay awake, right? So I want you to ask yourself, do you have a preference towards one of these spaces? I don't know if you figured it out by now, but I definitely prefer the stage. You ask me that, I'm going to be on TV any day of the week. I've already been on Canal 6. It would not be my first time, but you're going to have to look for that video of me on Wipeout yourself. And that photo you see under the stage right there, you know who that cute little kid is? That's me. When I was 7 years old, I literally moved this picture. I moved the coffee table of our living room aside. I built a stage in the living room. I got a banana from the kitchen, which I called the magic banana. And I said, everybody, come here. I'm going to do a magic show. Sit down. The show's about to start. And I made my whole family sit through many of the exact same magic shows again and again. So Freddie, when you pulled out magic earlier, you ran deep for me, my guy. And I know that's a preference of mine. I know you turn on these bright lights and I start to feel electric, right? I like big audiences and that's a place that really works for me. I've also recognized that that's not what everyone feels in that moment. And that there are moments in the classroom where I feel like my preference for the stage helps me and creates challenges for other folks. So I want to think through these things now as a teacher and see how we can connect these concepts to where we're at. And again, if you like more than one of these, that's okay, right? Again, this isn't about putting you in very definite, rigid black and white boxes, but more of just giving us a framework to understand our preferences for space. So Which moments in your classroom do you feel give learners a stage to perform their learning? What are the different moments that feel stage-like for you?
I think my students, they're like in the middle of the coffee table and being there back in the lab with creating stuff. Even though they love to come into the front of the class and being there on the stage, I think that they feel more comfortable when they're doing their stuff, when they're doing their creations, or that we get to sit and talk about a specific thing, but all of us at the same time, like sharing time. I have two specific sharing times in the how in the week. So we have like one open-ended sharing time, and then we have a sharing time like within the specific topic or one of the specific topics that we have there. And they do enjoy it, but I think that I get to assess more, or they feel more prepared to be assessed if we're doing either one of the two later stages. I can't hear you, Matt. I think your mic is off.
Yeah, you're right. Sorry, I was about to cough and I took a drink of water. Thanks. I don't see this as an order, right? To me, these are just different kinds of a space. I think my classrooms always have stages. I think they always have coffee tables and they always have studios. To me, this is just thinking about how do I label different moments? So I hear what you're saying. That moment to come to the front of the classroom and share, that's one of those stages, right? Or like Carl shares in chat, that's another one of those stages. So on the one hand, as a teacher, I can label that moment and say, this space is a stage. And then on the other hand, I can now start to ask myself, which of my students shine on stage, right? Alex, Catalina, oh, they're awesome on stage. They want everyone in the classroom looking at them. They want, hey, everyone, did you see my new water bottle? You know, it's right. Like some students thrive off of that. And I know that about them. And so if I know that there are students that shine on stage and I know where the stages are in my classroom, I know which students to assess in those moments, because that's when I'm going to see their best foot forward, right? Like, I'm going to be honest with you all, and I'm going to tell you this before any of you ask to hire me for private lessons. I would take a large classroom over a one-on-one class any day of the week. I think one is the hardest number to teach. I think after one, the next hardest number to teach is 100. For me, it's like it goes 1 and then 100 and down from 100. But I just think like when I lose the dynamics of interaction, those classes just feel so, and that's a personal thing, right? I know there are also people who I saw throwing threes out in the chat and are like, no, Matt, give me that student. I'm like, yeah, give me that conference presentation. Like, I want the lights. So that's why I want to approach this as a preference, right? There's no right or wrong. There just is what we feel. So does anyone else, and feel free in chat to share. I think if we just share first names, there's enough anonymity here. What are the names of your students who shine on stage? If you want to share a couple names of your students, who are those students who shine on stage? Another moment I think of like a stage is when I, the teacher, call on somebody, right? Like when I all of a sudden just go, Mary, what moments in class do you think are a stage? Suddenly, Mary's whipped into action, right? She might have been working on something else in some other moment and she snapped into it and feels this like everyone's looking at me and I have my phone. Oh, God, she was taking a picture for us. It's okay. I knew what you were doing.
Just taking a picture of you and my dogs who are here at my feet enjoying you.
But I think that moment of pulling all eyes into the classroom on someone, one of the ways I've started understanding that moment is that's me pushing someone up onto stage. And so one of the skills I've taken away as I've started looking at that space as a stage in my classroom is saying, I'm going to let students volunteer to go onto the stage, but I'm not going to tell them that they have to go on stage, because I know that's a preference, right? I know, like Adriana was sharing, Some students are just going to lock up, right? That's going to be a level of social pressure that's going to compound on their silence and shut them down. And that's okay, right? It doesn't have to be that everyone's ready to be up on that stage. So I like to make sure the stage moments in my classroom, especially, are always opt-in. They're things that every student has a chance to volunteer into. But if one student doesn't want to, I'm not going to push them onto that stage until they feel ready. Alrighty, next up. Which moments in your classroom give learners a coffee table to share their learning? Which are those spaces that feel very interactive and intersocial? For me, one obvious one is just snack time. I feel like snack time, everyone's just looking at what everyone else has. They're talking about it. They're trying to trade snacks and share snacks and who can open this for me. I see a lot of the most interactive moments in preschool genuinely around that we're sharing food at the table setting. Where are the other moments in our classroom that have that high level of interaction in that intimate small group setting, right? Who's making the choice of what table they want to work at based on what the task is, and who's making that choice based on who they want to work with. It's one way I can start to see that preference towards the coffee table, and oftentimes that interaction once they get there of, let's work together on this, right? And especially too in the way that I set up materials. If I set up only a few materials to where the what that they'll be doing is a collaborative shared process, I'm pulling multiple people into the same activity, right? I'm creating that locus of a coffee table, right? If every student has their own iPad, every student's into their own iPad. If there's one iPad between 4 learners and they're all looking at it and interacting with it together, that thing can function as the coffee table, the shared space that's pulling everyone into the center. Working with Play-Doh might be one, right? If they're sharing different colors or, have different molds that they're trying to come together. And which of your students shine in small groups? I know for me, one of my students who's a small group shiner is Sammy. Sammy is great at being the leader. When it was recess, she would be the one to be like, we're going to play family. I'm the mom. Alex is the dad. Juan Diego's the brother. Catalina the sister. And Berenice, you're the baby. Like, she was on it. She was giving out roles. Boom, 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 boom. Right? And a lot of times in a small group, it helps to have that kind of energy. Right? So I know Sammy really shined around that coffee table. I also know another student who really shined in small groups was Juan Diego. And for the opposite reason. Juan Diego was the most easygoing little guy. Whenever Sammy would be like, it's like this, and this, Juan Diego would go, okay. He was fine doing whatever, right? And so I think that energy really matched with people in his group being the leader or wanting to do something. And he was always ready to go there, right? So that mix of knowing how to help lead and make decisions, as well as that flexibility of knowing how to follow and compromise and agree. All of those skills come towards this preference towards shining in small groups. Which moments in your classroom give learners a studio to produce their learning? Which are the moments in your classroom that make learners feel like they have the solitude and independence to really work on something that's all their own? Nap time. Nap time's an individual one. Often paired up with nap time, reading time. I know a lot of times when I'd let my students choose a book right before nap time, one of my goals was that they'd slow down enough to then fall off to sleep. But I also know in that space, it was an independent time where they could all be in very different places with their pre-literacy skills, right? Some of our students were already recognizing letters and starting trying to read. And it was great that they had that individual moment to be right at their level. Other of our students were still learning how to flip the pages of a book without ripping that page. And so having that be this individual moment, let each student explore what pre-literacy skills they were working on, right? And not feel like they had to settle for whatever the common denominator of the group was.
I keep thinking of project-based learning, and just, yeah, I'm not sure what projects we're doing right now in preschool and MEP, but I think that, I mean, if you're going to do like create a puppet show, or if you're going to have do some kind of nature project, something like,
Yeah, and like thinking about that, Mary, and that, for bigger learners, being in the studio might be being it alone. But for younger learners, being in the studio might be the safe space of working on a project with mom and dad or grandpa and grandma, right? Like that home environment is its own kind of studio as well. So the kinds of things, yeah.
I was remembering when I was in preschool, we acted out a song, right?
Mhm.
We all had we created our little puppets for the little animal songs, and then we were each an animal in that song. So like that group, create your puppet, and then by raising it when the time came up in the song, that was showing a comprehension of that particular animal word. So that would be like, maybe I'm assessing both the creation of the animal and then also when we're all singing the song together.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Nice. And I like where you're thinking about there. And I'm also seeing you starting to think of assessment strategies that cross across these spaces, right? How do I assess some of the work that's been done in the studio alongside the work that's done on the stage? So it creates this composite picture of everything our learners do. I think a lot of art projects also create this time where everyone's focused in their own little world, their own little cuadro. And I think it lets them get lost in that process as well. Where do you usually assess your students? Do you feel like the assessments that you do are usually when your students are on the stage, usually when they're around the coffee table, or usually when they're in the studio?
I think that we should assess them at all times. I mean, at all stages. I mean, if we link this into like learning styles, it would be the same thing as the learning assessment. For the assessment style, like where they feel more comfortable. Maybe one person is gonna shine more on the stage than the studio, but I still get to assess him because I mean, he or she shines there. So I think that we should usually assess them at any time. But like if I shine on the stage, that doesn't mean that I don't get to assess him on the studio. Because then if he's not that good at the studio stage, then I know like which other skills I can try to enhance on him or try to develop later on. We know that he's going to shine on the stage and he's going to do great things, and I can assess that there. But on the other ones, I can still see, okay, maybe I can do some more about these and that on the other one. So I do believe that we should assess them at the different stages or spaces.
I completely agree in that. I think one of the takeaways I hope you leave with is that feeling of, am I assessing at a time and place that covers these different areas, right? Because I know a lot of the assessments we're moving towards is this descriptor-based can-do type of, oh, I've seen the skill, right? Once a student's demonstrated a skill on their own, I know they can do it. I have evidence of it. I've seen it, right? And so if I create these diverse spaces, if I create some spaces for my students to show off learning on the stage, some spaces around a coffee table and some in the studio, I think I'm increasing the likelihood that I will get to see that bird, to go back to my metaphor, right? I'm increasing the chances that I have to see my students put their absolute best forward. Another thing I want to think about here is, I think there's a common moment of assessment where teachers want to check comprehension. And I feel like that moment of calling on students really quickly transforms into the stage. And I think it's important to remember that if I'm trying to check if my students understand these new vocabulary words, so we can go watch a video, and I do so by calling on specific students and putting them on stage, and then they're wrong or they're silent I have to be careful about what that information means. Because one way to interpret that silence is they don't know these words. I need to give them more input. Another way to interpret that silence is maybe they're not comfortable with everyone looking at them, right? Maybe if they just had to tell these words to a partner and they all did it at the same time, I could hear everyone do the same thing, right? Like instead of me saying, Gabriel, count to 6, Juan Diego, count to 6, Sebastian, count to 6. If I say, hey, everyone, look at your partner and count to 6 together, right? Where that feeling is less eyes are on me, I can get the same information I want. How many of my students can count to 6? But they can get a different type of environment so that if the environment was the hang up, that they can move around that and get to showing off their learning. Can you think of ways that we could create a stage for a moment of observational formative assessment? Because I think it's a good thing. I'm not saying stages are bad. Remember, I'm the guy who loves the stage. If you as a teacher never have stages in your classroom, I'm going to make a stage in your classroom. I'm going to get up on the table and dance around and get the attention on me because it's what I want. Yeah, Mary?
I think with preschool, we could have kids, we could make little books and have them read the books to each other, like picture books to each other. And then they're on stage with each other. And it's also something that you can repeat over and over again.
Nice. During oral presentations. On the resource site that I'm going to be sharing with you all soon, there's this really cool video from YouTube of a teacher who's adapted show and tell into this interactive activity. The child brings in an object and then gives clues, and then people in the audience have to guess what's inside the mystery bag. And I thought that was such a cool moment. It took the moment of being on the stage and gave that child something specific to do, but then also gave a reason for people in the audience to pay attention. Because I think that's another one of my hangups with the stage in preschool is that I definitely get the locked in attention of the one student I'm talking to. But usually the rest of the class has very little reason to be listening to that moment, right? And so I think I really like that video I want to share with you later because it has one student up on stage and the other students are still pulled into learning with them. And also Maritza shares in chat oral presentations. Yeah, for sure. How about the coffee table space? How could we create a coffee table-like space for a small group moment of observational formative assessment?
The first thing that comes to my mind, it's actually like a project-based learning. I mean, PBL, I think that's something, I mean, I can do a PBL as a whole group, but I can have them like in centers, like this center is going to have one PBL, the other one. I think that's a good moment. It's going to be a small group. We're putting in their social skills and cognitive skills.
Yeah.
So I think that's the first thing that really comes up.
And one of the things I really like to do in that situation, Adriana, is sometimes I'll say, okay, what are 4 very safe centers? Centers my students do all the time that they don't need a lot of my attention for and that they're very independent with. I'm going to make those the 4 centers on the table behind me. And then I'm going to spend all of center time just at this one table. Because this is the challenging activity where they're going to need more of my support. And it's also the activity I want to assess. So sometimes I can also use center time creatively to make the rest of the classroom kind of self-sustaining and let me focus in on, oh, at this center, we're using this fancy new wooden toy to practice going to the supermarket and buying food, which sounds exciting. And I hope they're going to talk a lot. Right? And I want to be there that whole time. So I get to observe every little bit of language that gets pulled out of that activity. Right? So I also like using that center time because I can create this feeling of a lot of coffee tables and then I can zoom in on the one that I want to assess. That helps. How about studios? Can you think of a way to create a studio for an individual moment of assessment?
I don't know, but once again, the first thing that comes into my mind, it's like STEM projects.
Hmm.
It's very individual. Maybe they might need guidance, but at the end, if we really pursue a STEM project, we know that it's their solution to the problem, meaning that we don't need to be really on top of them. But in regards, like they need extra something or something fell off. So I think like those like that STEM projects or like very like specific small projects that they get to do. So I don't know if we were okay. So for example, I don't know, we were working with sounds and then they get to do a project in where they need to recreate the sounds or the letters with using different materials in the classroom.
Yeah.
Maybe I will have a lot of materials in the middle of the table. It's not a center, it's just that group, that table. But when they have to do that own creation, where I get to assess it, I mean, those are like moments or activities that we could do.
Yeah, absolutely. Kind of a project like that. One of the things I like thinking about with that too, if I'm trying to see what can you do in the studio with this, is I might create a worksheet that's a game, and I want that student to play that game with their parent, right? Like that's weekend homework. Play this game in English with your parent. Now, part of the reason why I'm doing that is my parents are saying, how come I don't hear my son speaking English? And I'm like, well, your son knows you don't speak English, but I want them to get to see that. So I'm trying to design something so the language skills go home with them. Well, first, I'm going to do that activity on the stage, me. I'm going to model it in the classroom. And then I might have some students do that activity on the stage in the classroom. Then I might have students practice that activity in a coffee table-like setting. Okay, now play the game at your table with your peers. And then I send it home to the parents. I record a video in our family WhatsApp group, and I say, hey, I want you to play over the weekend and send me back a video of your child playing along with you, right? But I want to scaffold up to that place because I might have some students in my classroom that do not volunteer to try it out on stage. And those same students, when their table is playing, they're silent. But that student is watching and they're listening. And after they get all of that modeling in the classroom, and then they go home, maybe with their mom, they can play that game. And then I can get sent that video and say, hey, look, they watched me do it on stage. They watched their classmates do it around the coffee table. And then they went home and they did it in the studio, right? And that really reminds me of Ana Belen and how she wouldn't speak to me, right? I was doubtful if she was learning at all. And then one day her mom sent me a voice message and said, Matt, ¿me puede ayudar con algo? Estoy discutiendo con mi niña. She's 3 years old at this point in the story. Estoy discutiendo con mi niña. Ella dice que la palabra ojos se pronuncia eyes. Y yo pienso que se pronuncia is. ¿Cómo es que se pronuncia? And I was like, oh, fíjese que su hija tiene razón. The 3-year-old daughter was teaching the mom pronunciation. And I was amazed because this child doesn't speak to me. I've never heard her speak English, ever, not once. And here she is at home teaching her mom pronunciation. And I was just like, this is a child that shines in the studio, right? So if I can find a way to get that learning process extend to where she feels safe, then we're going to get a lot out of that. Alrighty, one last quick thing to send you. While I'm talking through this, I'm going to share a link in our chat. That's our feedback form. If you liked what you're learning today and you want to share with us what was helpful, please take some time to fill out our feedback. I also want to share with you these. This was our approach at I4CL to create some summative assessment in preschool that applied a lot of the principles of formative assessment. So we were approached a month before the end of the school year by the director of this program and told, I want to do grades. Now, we hadn't been doing any grades up until this point. So 9 months into the school year, we had nothing written down in terms of grades. And so we needed to figure out what can we do with report cards that's going to benefit learning. So my co-teacher Maggie and I designed this individual checklist that lasted over a period of 2 weeks. And every day for 2 weeks, we took data on all of these different language use skills. We zoomed in on during structured time, where the teacher's leading activities. Is this student using English or Spanish with the teacher and with their peers? Which languages do we hear with which people? How about during unstructured time? Do they speak English with their teacher or peers? Do they speak Spanish with their teacher or peers? How about in terms of specific language and in terms of comprehension? What are they showing in terms of understanding Spanish and English? Excuse me, I'm out of water. 5 minutes before the end. Now, I found that this overtime approach, so punished for not filling my bottle up. I found this overtime approach was really important. This is Eitzel's paper. If I just assessed Eitzel on November 6th, she would get 6 out of 12. That's 50%. That's not very good. But remember, Eitzel's my dormilona. She was tired on Monday. When I look over the course of that whole 2 weeks, Eitzel demonstrates 11 of these 12 skills. Now, some of them she demonstrates more than others. Some of them just once or twice. But by assessing the use of Spanish and English with teachers and peers during structured and unstructured time, over the course of 2 weeks, we got to hear our learners' whole voices. And so then we got to put that together into this final rubric to report that data to parents. So after this ongoing process of formatively assessing their performance in the final month, we were able to make a summative report at the end. So that was what I promised before about mixing the lenses and kind of taking bits and pieces from both. And I thought it ended up with something I really liked, using this ongoing process of show me your skills. So I want to leave you with some time. Any questions, thoughts, or inspirations you'd like to share? If not, I want to remind you, if you haven't, make sure you take the time to fill out our registration form, as well as our feedback form. We want to hear from you. And if you want to learn more about today's topic, we've created a resource site full of more information and examples and strategies related to observation and assessment. So let me show you how to get there right now. If you open up that link that I just put in chat, you'll come to this website right here. This has all of the 2023 webinars that the Institute for Collaborative Learning is putting together for the Ministry of Public Education in Costa Rica. You can find all of the information from our first webinar and soon a recording there. You can click on the link for our second webinar. This is where you'll find the recording of today's session. If you want to click through the slideshow and get some data from a slide you missed, you're welcome to click on that here. If you watch a recording of a webinar and you want to fill out our virtual attendance, you can. And then you can find all of these great articles, videos, and other resources that I referenced as I was researching to share this information with you. So you can find that here. You could also mingle around and see what other webinars we're putting together for other teachers in MEP as well. So again, you can either scan that QR code you see on the screen, take a screenshot, or click the link you find in chat if you'd like to find your way to our MEP resource website. And then we want to close with a very big thank you. We want to thank all of our collaborators, the regional and national advisors at the Ministry of Public Education, for all of the work that they do behind the scenes to help figure out what's going on in your classrooms and to listen to what are the things that you all are curious about and helping communicate that to people like us so that we can take time to do some research and share some ideas with you all as well. We also want to put a really big thank you out again to the U.S. Embassy in San Jose for funding today and other opportunities like today. I'm always grateful for a chance to connect with teachers and share, and I'm thankful for that opportunity. And finally, I want to thank all of you. You all have just finished working a busy day, a tiring day. And at the end of that day, you've taken 2 hours to come and keep learning about teaching with us. And that time that you're giving is a gift to your students and to their learning. And so from your students to you, thank you, teachers. We really appreciate you.
Thanks so much, Matt. And thank you everyone for coming. Thank you. Thank you. We hope it's useful. We hope the resources are useful. And if you have any questions or comments, please let us know. And we'll let you know when the next webinar is. The next webinar is coming. Oh, I don't have the date in my brain.
Did someone say they wanted a date in their brain?
I need a date in my brain. Yes.
I'm looking at June 12th, 2 weeks from now.
That's right.
And we'll be thinking about learning, playing, and screening, the integral role of the teacher in the use of technology in preschool learning. Or how to not lose your job to AI.
And then we're also going to have 3 webinars that are for everybody about teacher well-being in the classroom, and then some reflection and lesson planning. So we hope to see some of you out there. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Have an awesome afternoon.
Thanks, everybody. Take care.
Thank you. Bye-bye.